All right. Boom. Jen, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Well, thank you for having me, Sean. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, like we were saying offline, I was so inspired by hearing your story. I think I was in a podcast rabbit hole, and then I came across this headline saying that this woman lost 80 pounds in 10 months. And I mean, how do you not click catch your thumbnail like that, right? First of all, I thought it was like, okay, maybe it's like a clickbaity title. Who knows if this is true or not? Um, this is our first time speaking, so I would
It
love to
is.
know the truth. What's the real story here?
Well, that is the truth, and I was, obese in 2014. So, tw 10 years ago, actually
Mm,
almost to the month, because it was August of 2014 when I really started intermittent fasting, but 10 years ago, I was obese and I was struggling with my weight. And I had been a yo-yo dieter for so long. Like probably so many of your listeners, both the men and the women these days can relate to that. Women, we may have been conscious of our weight earlier and tried more diets along the years. But I think this in modern society, we have an adult population that struggles with weight. But I was good at so many things. I have a doctorate in gifted education. I was a teacher, elementary teacher for 28 years. I taught gifted kids. And, I could do a lot of things and I could do them well, but my weight was just one of those things I couldn't get a handle on. And so, I yo-yoed up and down over the decades until I found myself in 2014 um the heaviest weight I'd ever been. I had really kind of given up for a bit. I tried so many things and, I would lose some weight only to gain it all back plus more. And so I'd given up for a bit. And we went on a family cruise in spring of 2014. And I knew I was big. I knew I was uncomfortable in my body, but it was looking at those photos from the cruise. I just really couldn't even recognize myself. And then I got back home and I got my scale off the shelf where I had put it because I didn't want to know. I didn't want to know how big I was. I put it on the floor, got on it, and I weighed 210 pounds. And I'm 5'5", so that puts me in the obese category. So I was like, okay, this is it. No more. I am smart. I can figure this out. I have great willpower. I've done some crazy diets over the years. I can do it. I'm done with this. And I wish I could say that was the day I started intermittent fasting and I never looked back, but that's not it. I still had some twists and turns before I really became an intermittent faster. The cruise was in April and it was August when I really became an intermittent faster and I never quit again.
mm.
And so, I went on to lose 80 pounds. At first, 75. My initial goal was to lose 75 and I hit that. And then here I am. This is the first time in my adult life I haven't yo-yoed. I never needed to buy bigger clothes since, I hit my goal. And in fact, I continued to lose a little bit of weight after I lost the initial 75 pounds, ending up at about 80 pounds down overall. I've been through menopause
Mm.
now and have changed careers and have kept the weight off, which is something, the younger me could never really have dreamed of. You lose the weight, you gain it back. You lose the weight, you gain it back. That was how it always went. So
Well,
thanks
this
to
is
intermittent
proof.
fasting. Huh?
Yeah, I mean, 2014 when you started,
Right.
it's 10 years later now, almost 11. We're seeing you here on video. This is not AI video.
It's
Like
me.
you've kept it off. You look great, right? So this
Thank
is
you.
this is not some fake video that you're seeing here. Um,
Right.
what was the other diets that you've tried? Because it seems like you've tried. It wasn't a lack of will that
Oh, no.
was preventing you from keeping the weight off. What were all
Mm.
the things that you've tried that didn't work? And number one, and also how did you find about like what was your discovery path of finding out about intermittent fasting?
Well, I really was kind of a diet aficionado, which might sound crazy, but it was something I was interested in from early days. My mother was a dance teacher and she was always like hyper focused on body, right? And of course, I was a dancer growing up at the dance studio and again, we're wearing leotards and tights all the time. And I was not like a ballerina or anything. I was better at tap. But I was still at the dance studio all the time and I watched my mother diet all those years, but she would always turn to calorie counting and She did a little bit of Weight Watchers back in the day, this like 70s, 80s. And I can remember when I was in high school, I was not overweight. I was really slim. I was very active with the dancing. In my 11th grade year, it was like 1985, and I took a computer programming class, and my project for computer programming was, oh, I'll do a calorie counter. I wrote it in BASIC, which was the language, computer language at the time. And so I didn't need to count calories. I wasn't, like I said, I was slim, but I was like, okay, counting calories. So my first little computer program I wrote was calorie counting. Well, then I went off to college and I gained the freshman 15.
Mm.
And I came home and I was at the dance studio actually. And one of the other girls said, "Ooh, what happened to you?" And I was like, oh. So there we were, my first diet, summer after freshman year. And guess what I did? I did calorie counting. Like so many people, you've done it. You wrote the little numbers down in your notebook. You keep your calories to 1,200 a day or whatever the advice might be that you're trying to follow. And, you can lose the weight. And of course, I was young. So that really started it all off. In the 90s, I did the low fat diet. That worked really well for me. I got really, really skinny, but I would always, you know, quit doing it and gain the weight back because I know about myself now. I am not good at restriction or counting things or saying no to foods that I love. I want to be able to eat all the foods, not the low fat foods, not the low carb foods. I want to eat all the foods, carbs and fat together. I don't want to have to count it up and say, oh, I've eaten all my calories for the day. I can't have anything else.
Mm.
So, I did every single diet that came along until 2014, and I haven't done any of them since then. But if it came around before 2014, you can bet that I either tried it or I read about it because one of my
Mm.
favorite hobbies all those years when I was, losing and gaining and yo-yoing, I would go to Amazon and I would peruse the diet and weight loss category. Oh, what are people buying today? What's number one? What's number two? What are the diets? And I would read all the 5-star reviews and see what people were saying. And I would have so much optimism. And then, I would buy the book and I would try it. And, most of them, they want you to give things up or eat their certain way. And that works as long as you can stick to it. But like I said already, I am not good at giving things up or saying, never again for any kind of foods. So I would lose a little bit, gain it all back. I even went down some crazy paths along the way. And that's all in my new second edition of my book, Delayed on Denied. I originally wrote it in 2016, but just did the second edition this summer. I tell my whole story. And I did some crazy things along the way that I absolutely would not recommend now. I've learned a lot about nutrition, how the body works, the metabolism, why the crash diets don't work, that sort of thing.
What are some of those
But at
things
the
for
time,
people to
well,
not
um,
make those mistakes?
diet pills, for example. When I had just had my second child. He was born in 1999. So I remember, after my first child, I bounced back pretty quickly. Was able to take the weight off. He was born in 1998. But then I had the second child. And, when my first one was born, I weighed like 163 the day I went to deliver the hospital, which is, that was not very much at all. It felt like a lot. But then when my second child was born, I'd gotten up a lot higher, maybe like 180s at that point when I went to deliver. And I was like, well, the weight just going to fall right off again like it did before. Well, it didn't. And I can remember, being at school and, I was around 163 at this time and I wasn't pregnant. So I'm like, I am at my pregnancy weight and I'm not pregnant and my child is like a year old now. And what am I going to do? Well, a friend of mine walked down the hall and she looked fabulous. And I'm like, what are you doing? She's like, oh, I went to my doctor. He gave me diet pills. I'm not even hungry. I can't even eat. The weight is falling off. I'm like, I'm going to try that too. And so I went to her doctor and got the diet pills. I mean, it's got to be great if a doctor gives it to you, right?
Mm.
That's what we think. So
Yeah.
I took the diet pills and felt awful, but sure enough, took away my appetite, lost the weight, zero struggles, felt fabulous to lose the weight, but it didn't feel fabulous to take the diet pills. I felt crazy. I couldn't sleep, mind racing all the time. Eventually, I realized, you could keep getting them. They'll keep giving you diet pills if you go to the clinics. They'll give them to you. You go to a different clinic, they'll give them to you. And so you can take them as long as you want to. But I felt so physically bad, and I'm like, this can't be good for me. So I stopped. Thank goodness, I've been great at listening to my body when I've been doing anything extreme. And my body said, stop doing this. So I quit taking the diet pills and said, okay, never again. Well, then I gained 50 pounds back. Actually, I gained more than I had lost. I gained 50 pounds in like 18 months after stopping the diet pills.
After you stopped it.
And
Okay.
right now I understand why. We have a lot of data, through science to understand what happens when we do a really low calorie diet. And the diet pills were basically putting me on an enforced low calorie diet because I had no appetite. Of course, diet drugs are different now. Instead of pills, people are taking injections, but they work the same way. They work better than the diet pills I was taking back then, but they take away your appetite. So you're on a forced, very low calorie diet. And just like, whether someone has gastric bypass surgery or they're taking the drugs or whatever it is, or whether you're just willpowering it through your very low calorie diet, we know based on the Minnesota starvation experiment, which was done decades ago, and through the Biggest Loser study, we know that when we restrict calories, we're not eating very much, whether it's through diet pills or just low calorie diet, our body slows our metabolisms down because our bodies want us to survive. So what happens when your metabolism is slow, your hormones are all out of whack now, your body is screaming at you to eat? Well, you start eating again and you gain all the way back plus more, and you feel like you're the biggest loser ever because if you were just a better person, you would have kept the weight off, when really it's your body trying to keep you alive that causes you to regain the weight. Of course, I understand that now. I would never, ever do any of those things again now that I understand what the metabolic consequences are. And you can heal your metabolism, by the way, because I have at this point. I don't have to count calories or overly restrict what I eat. But I never want to go down that restrictive path ever again. And I would like to encourage everybody else not to do it, because we know how that ends up. And it does not end up in you've kept the weight off forever and you're just happy on your low calorie diet for the rest of your life. No, that doesn't work out well for us.
So these days, the new diet pill that everybody's talking about, of course, is Ozempic.
Right? And it's a
What are your
shot. You take it once a week. I would have been all over
yeah?
that. But if I were
Mhm.
still obese and didn't know what I know now, I would have been like, sign me up for that.
So,
Absolutely.
knowing that you know kind of your experiences now, what are your thoughts on Ozempic? You mentioned that it is an improvement of probably the diet pills from before,
Mhm.
but is it deja vu all over again? That once you're
Yeah.
off of it, you're just going to gain all the way back for most
Well, it,
people?
it puts you on a forced low calorie diet because it really it ramps up your satiety hormones to the point that you feel like you've just eaten a huge meal and you can't eat. So you're eating very, very low amounts of food. And that's going to have the same effects that a very low calorie diet has. It's going to slow your metabolism. There's some indication that people lose a great deal of muscle mass when they're taking these shots. And that sets you up for when you do regain the weight, most people regain fat.
Mm.
And so now you have less muscle mass and more fat because you're regaining the weight because your metabolism has slowed. The thing about intermittent fasting in the clean fast, which we can talk about in a bit, is that, I've talked to people. I have a large intermittent fasting community, and I actually interviewed somebody over the summer for my podcast, Intermittent Fasting Stories. And she's the first person I've talked to who used the GLP-1 drugs. She's from Australia. She used the drugs, but then they were suddenly unavailable. So she was obese. She used the drugs, felt what it felt like to have that appetite suppression that these drugs provide. Then she couldn't get them anymore because they were no longer available in her country for her to get. So she said, I've got to do something else. She discovered intermittent fasting, started fasting clean. She found my work, started fasting clean. She said it was amazing that the clean fast plus her eating window, nourishing her body well within her eating window, gave her the same level of appetite control that the drugs did. The clean fast, we're fasting clean. We're finally able to tap into our fat stores easily during the clean fast because that's what all those fat stores are there for. We
Mm.
feel great. It's very different than being on a low calorie diet because you're using your fat stores for fuel easily. And I can talk about why that's not the case on a low calorie diet where you're eating all day. And then we have what we call appetite correction. Now, that's a phrase coined by Dr. Bert Herring, who I read his work probably around 2009. So I started fasting consistently in 2014, but I knew about fasting from about 2009 because, again, like I told you, I haunted the diet aisle of Amazon and read everything. And, there were intermittent fasting plans that popped up. There was the 5-2 diet, Dr. Michael Mosley. That was a kind of intermittent fasting plan around like 2012. There was the 8-hour diet that came out about that same time. Dr. Burt Hearing and his Fast 5 diet, which was a 5-hour daily eating window. So, I had dabbled in it all those times and it never stuck until 2014. But Dr. Burt Hearing wrote a book called Appetite Correction that I was talking about before. And that phrase changed my thinking to the point that, oh, we are supposed to have functioning hormones in our bodies that tell us when we're hungry and tell us when we've had enough. We're supposed to. And it made me think back to my own kids, when they were babies. When they were hungry, they cried until you fed them. Didn't matter when they last ate. If they were hungry, they knew it and they let you know until you fed them because they're born with functioning hunger and satiety signals. On the flip side, I don't care how much, you're told to feed them. They stop when they've had enough. There could be this much left in the bottle and you're like, you just need a little bit more. Come on. Nope. They're done. When a baby is done, a baby is not going to have any more because they have the satiety signals that are still functioning. We lose touch with those throughout our life for multiple reasons. The food, eating on a schedule, eating to clean your plate. You're no longer listening to your body and you do lose the ability to listen. And so the beauty with intermittent fasting, when you're fasting clean and you're eating real foods for the most part in your eating window, you get so much more in touch with those signals that you've lost touch with. And suddenly you know when you've had enough and you can stop. And you also know maybe you need a little bit more today, but you're back in touch with the signals just as nature intended. Sean, I think it's really interesting to note in the whole world, all the mammals, and of course we're mammals, of all the mammals in the world, what are the only mammals, or even we could actually carry this over to reptiles and fish and everything, all living creatures, the only ones struggling with obesity in the entire world, humans and the animals we feed.
Mm.
All the other, no squirrel is not sure about how much to eat or what macros he should be eating. There's not a lion who isn't sure about what should he be a carnivore or not. He's not sure. He knows. They know. They never lose touch with those signals. The animals we feed, though, they lose touch with those, like our cats, our dogs, the geese at the park.
Great point. And before we go deeper into intermittent fasting, I want to give perhaps for the portion of the audience that may not know a lot about intermittent fasting, can you give some context about what intermittent fasting is and how is it different than someone just eating less
Mhm.
calories throughout the day, but not in a time restricted manner?
Absolutely. That is a great question. And it is different. And it has to do with um, a hormone called insulin is one of the important hormones that comes into play. And so everybody's heard of insulin, but you might only think of insulin as something that has to do with, if you have diabetes, if you have diabetes, you need to take insulin, or you might have heard of insulin resistance. But we all have insulin, unless you're a type 1 diabetic and you have to give yourself insulin shots. Our bodies produce insulin all the time. It's always going on in the background. And so insulin is a storage hormone. All right. So think about that. If you have high levels of insulin, your body is in storage mode. So what causes us to have insulin coming out? Eating. Eating causes our bodies to release insulin. So let's think about a typical low calorie diet that you may have been advised to go on, where they're telling you to eat 6 small meals throughout the day. Think about that. And there's one other little thing that causes insulin response. The cephalic phase insulin response is something I really enjoyed learning about. It really taught me a lot about, oh, I understand why fasting can be hard if we're not fasting clean, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. But when we ingest something that our brain perceives as food-like or sweet, we have what's called the cephalic, which brain cephalic phase insulin response, and our body releases insulin. So let's think about diet sodas for a minute. if anyone's ever tried to do a calorie counting diet where you're counting calories all day, you probably go straight for those 0-calorie beverages because they've been sold to us as, here is how you have 0 calories, but it's still delicious and it has no effect on your body because it's 0 calories. So
That's
you
what I
might
thought.
be
Aren't
right,
those supposed to
right.
be
You
good
might
for
be
you?
nursing that diet soda all day long.
I
Okay.
mean, it says
So,
0.
right, it's got 0 calories. And everybody knows, notice I'm using quotation marks here. We know that the only thing that is important for weight loss is calories in, calories out, right? Calories in, calories out. And if you're putting 0 in, then that's good, right? Well, let's think about that in the context of insulin. I learned about this when I read the Obesity Code in 2016, written by Dr. Jason Fung. And I had never heard of insulin other than in the context of, um, diabetes, although I had heard about it through the low carb community who said, well, it's just carbs. Carbs cause you to release insulin, nothing else but carbs. As long as you're low carb, you'll lose weight because it's just about carbs and insulin. Of course, I believed that because that's what I heard. And so when I read the Obesity Code, suddenly he talks about the cephalic phase insulin response. I'm like, well, that's interesting. And like they did some studies with rats or mice, some sort of rodent, and where all they did was taste sweetness. I think they did sugar, but they also did an artificial sweetener. So they did both of them. And for both the real sugar and the artificial sweetener, tasting that caused them to release insulin just from
Mm,
tasting it. And then they went one step further because these are lab animals. They cut the nerve from the tongue to the brain. So they could no longer, their brain could not perceive the taste anymore. Well, guess what happened? No insulin response. When their brain
mm,
did not perceive the taste of sweetness, there was no cephalic phase insulin response. It's kind of an anticipatory response. And if you think about it biologically, if you go back in time, everything that was sweet before the modern era, everything that was sweet had a big sugar load coming with it, honey, fruit, whatever it was. And so your body knew, we're about to have a hit of sugar getting digested and this sweet, whatever it is coming in. We're going to need some insulin because insulin's job is to lower our blood sugar. It's supposed to. That's what we need it to do. And so our brain says, go ahead and start the insulin. We're going to need it. So it pumps out the insulin. But here we are in the modern world and we're drinking those diet sodas. We're putting, fruit flavor in our water, all those water enhancers. And so your brain is thinking all day long, sweetness coming in, sweetness coming in. We're about to have sugar high. We're going to need it. So your body keeps pumping out the insulin all the time. And so even if it's 0 calories, you're setting yourself up with high levels of insulin, storage, storage, storage. Insulin is also anti-lipolytic, which means against fat burning. If you have high levels of insulin, you're not going to tap into your fat stores very well. So now you're doing this very low calorie diet where you're eating tiny meals all during the day, not really enough to fuel you very well, right? Because you're trying to get into a calorie deficit because you want to burn your body fat. But you're also having your flavored 0-calorie waters and your diet sodas. So insulin stays high. Insulin, being anti-lipolytic, keeps you from really getting into that stored fat that's there to fuel you. So you're starving because you're not well fueled. You're not eating enough, but your body can't access your fat stores very well. It might be able to get to some of it, but not enough to fuel you well. And also, it might have to burn some muscle tissue because that's all it can get to. So
mm.
you're miserable. Your body senses that there's not enough fuel coming in, lowers your metabolic rate. You're hangry. The diet's over because you failed again. Does that make sense? Now, how's fasting different? Well, it's different because you're fasting clean, meaning you're going to have plain water, nothing with flavor added to that water. As I've got my plain water right here because I haven't opened my eating window yet. You've got your plain water. You are you can have black coffee, plain tea, not the fruity sweet ones, but just actual tea because a bitter flavor profile does not cause you to have an insulin response. And you can have plain sparkling water. And so while you're fasting clean, you're keeping your insulin down. And so suddenly your body sees all the fat that's on your body and it uses it, it taps into it. It's there to be a source of fuel for you to use. That's why it's stored on your body for the times that your body needs it. So now you can get to it, you're using it. And so your body is well fueled, and that's the difference. You're not hangry, because once your body has flipped that metabolic switch, you're fat adapted, which I can talk about in a minute, and you are able to tap into fat stores during the fast, you feel amazing. And so you
Mm,
don't have the hangries, you don't have the blood sugar crashes, you're just steady, steady, steady. So that's when you're fasting. Then you have an eating window, and you put all of your eating into that eating window. For me, a 5-hour daily eating window was pretty much what I did throughout the weight loss. That was a good weight loss window for me, and it's also pretty much a good maintenance window for me as well. 5 hours, you can really nourish your body well within 5 hours. And you eat until you're satisfied. You eat delicious foods. Am I going to say everyone should be doing a 5-hour window? No. One thing about intermittent fasting is it's very individualized. My husband, who never needed to lose a pound, he has a PhD in organic chemistry. He's a science guy, never needed to lose a pound. But after he watched me lose the weight, and like I haven't been to the doctor for a sick visit since 2016.
good for
I
you.
haven't needed an antibiotic or been sick. So he watched me and saw how great I was feeling. And he started doing intermittent fasting as well, but he eats within an 8-hour window. He didn't need to lose weight. He does it just for the health benefits. So I like to call intermittent fasting the health plan with the side effect of weight loss. So people who are listening and they're like, well, I don't need to lose any weight. Why would I do it? It's healthy. It's a healthy way to live.
Yeah, so when you mentioned 8-hour window there, for you it was 5. Perhaps it might be some confusion there, like, what are the differences? Like, and also, what is the minimum required number of hours to fast to be considered an intermittent fasting window? Because
Well,
do you
that
just
is a
wake up?
great question. Yeah.
Right,
We
yeah.
all fast. Every person listening fasts already. You wake up and you break your fast. That's what breakfast is named for, breaking the fast, breakfast. But the difference is when you're an intermittent faster, you just delay it a bit. You wait before you don't like jump up, start eating first thing. You fast clean, you have your clean, fast beverages, you open your window. It really depends on a lot of personal factors when it comes to what is the best window for you. It depends on your goal, your health, whether you're a big eater or a small eater, right? Somebody who eats like a bird, a 5-hour window might not be enough. I'm more of a volume eater, so I can eat plenty of food in 5 hours.
Hmm.
So it really just depends on you and what you need. Now, on the flip side, if it's someone who has been obese for decades and yo-yo dieting, someone who has really high levels of insulin, a lot of insulin resistance, maybe type 2 diabetic, they may need more fasting. There's something called alternate daily fasting, which is a very well researched fasting protocol. Dr. Krista Verde has done the research on that. And, I mentioned the 5-2 plan that Dr. Michael Mosley popularized in right around 2012. It's based on Krista Verde's work with alternate day fasting. You might fast for 36 hours and then you have, 12-hour eating periods. So you're doing really like 36 fasting, 12 hours eating, for example. I would not start with that. That is more like once you're fat adapted and you might know that your body needs a little extra. But there are so many different fasting protocols out there and so many different ways to incorporate it in your life. And it's not prescriptive. And that is both, a blessing and a curse, right? I sure wish I could say, here's the exact protocol for everyone, go do that. And I can't. I realized at some point along the way, every single diet book that I had read prior to mine, but okay, let me put that out there, clarify that. But every other single diet book seems to be like the diet that worked for the person who did it. So they tell you this is what you should do, even down to like the food that you should eat and when you should eat it, right? So like everybody who wrote a low carb diet book, they wrote that because they do great on low carb. So they're like, well, everyone will do great on low carb because I did great on low carb, right?
Mm,
Whereas, like even some fasting books. There are a good number of intermittent fasting books out there, and most of them are like, here's exactly when you must fast and how you must fast, and here's what you must eat. Mine are different because I recognize that you could follow me around all day and do exactly what I do and have different results because your body is different than mine. I'm a big believer in bio-individuality and the foods that work best for me. I have a different gut microbiome than you. I have different genetics than you. And so I have different diet history than you. And so what works for me is not going to be the same. So the blessing and the curse, the blessing is that you're empowered to figure out what works for you. When you're reading my books and listening to my work, I want you to do your own experiment of one and feel empowered to do that. The curse is that I can't tell you exactly what to do. And you've got to be your own experiment of one. But that is the blessing and the curse all at the same time, because you
Yeah.
are empowered like never before. I'm not going to give you a meal plan or tell you that you should be low carb or that you should be vegan or that you should be whatever. One thing we can all agree on is probably the standard American diet isn't going to get you to your healthiest.
Yeah.
But when I started intermittent fasting, I was eating the standard American diet. I was so tired of giving up foods. I had done a summer of keto. That didn't work for me. I never lost any weight. And I hated how I felt. And I was just like so tired. I was like, I am just going to do intermittent fasting and eat in a window. And that is it. Over time, I've gotten more in tune with my body. And the way I eat now, very different than the way I ate 10 years ago. Now I love vegetables. I love Brussels sprouts. I eat real food almost all the time with very, very few ultra processed foods. But I just started with the fasting. I dialed in the fasting and learned how to listen to my body.
I think that's important around what you mentioned around figuring out what is the right system for you. Because I think
Yeah.
we don't fail from the level of our ambition or goals, but we fail from the level of systems that we've created for ourselves, meaning habits
Yeah.
is often what allows us to accomplish the goals. And if you can't maintain that level of fasting throughout years, you've done it for 10 years now, which is what
Yeah.
allowed you to keep off that weight. I think it's very difficult for people to maintain that. So I guess, you know, we've
Well, you
actually
sound like a
had
James Clear fan. Are you a James Clear fan?
I am. We've
I
actually even
recognize
had
some of his wording. Did you know, fun fact, James Clear is an intermittent faster?
I believe it. I believe it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he is.
sounds like
And
something he would
that's
do.
when I was reading Atomic Habits, actually was a surreal moment. My book, Fast, Feast, Repeat, had just hit the New York Times bestseller list. It was the summer of 2020. I'm sharing the shameless plug. But I was reading it I was actually reading Atomic Habits on the beach. And my book had just hit the New York Times bestseller list, but it was right next to Atomic Habits. And I was like,
Ooh,
"Whoa!" I felt like
nice.
it was
It's a
like
great list
amazing.
to
It's
be
such a
on.
great feeling. And of course,
Oh,
his book
yeah.
never came off the New York Times bestseller list since that day. I mean, it's like literally been on it every week. And mine was just on there for 2 weeks, but it was still really exciting. But the book Atomic Habits, the whole time I was reading it, of course, as an intermittent faster, as someone, I was a school teacher and I've coached through my podcasts and my communities, hundreds of thousands of people as intermittent fasters, it really comes down to the habits. Intermittent fasting is the same thing. He talks about in Atomic Habits, what you tell yourself matters. Like if you say, I'm going to try this intermittent fasting. Well, that's what I did from 2009 to 2014 when I dabbled in it. I'd heard about it, but I dabbled in it. But to me, it was just something you do, you try it, whatever, it's a diet. It wasn't until 2014 when I was like desperate. And I'm like, you know what? I am going to do this. And my mindset was, I'm not going to stop doing this. And I didn't. I've never quit since I started in 2014. Now, does that mean I haven't had days with really long eating windows? Of course I have. If I wake up and I'm on a vacation and there's an amazing breakfast that I can't get at home and it's window worthy and I open earlier that day, did I still fast? Yeah, I fasted the whole time I was sleeping, right? I didn't quit. My habit is I wake up and I fast clean until I open my window. I am an intermittent faster. And that's the wording James Clear would suggest that you use for whatever it is, whatever your habits are. I am an intermittent faster. It is just what I do. And I don't have to
Mm,
think about it. I don't have to wake up and say, oh, am I going to do that? Yeah, it's just what I do. But the beauty is I feel so good. To
absolutely,
anybody
yeah.
who's not feeling good right now, if you wake up and you don't feel good and you don't feel good throughout your day, then what you're doing is not giving you what you need for your body to feel good. And feeling good is a powerful motivator. And that's what we hear in our community. In the revised Delay Don't Deny that just came out in August, I have, the whole last part of it is success stories, people from my community, and they share their stories and they all just talk about how much better they feel. And so, all those low calorie diets we did, or when we gave up whole food groups or counted our macros and we made ourselves miserable, we felt worse and worse the longer time went on. And we just couldn't keep it up because our bodies were like, stop doing it. Like when I took those diet pills and I felt like crap, my body said, stop doing that. But with intermittent fasting, my body's like, keep doing it. It feels so good. And, I just turned 55
Oh,
and
wow.
I feel better than I did in my 30s.
I had no idea you were 55. You look great.
Yeah, that's the fasting.
That's the fasting, yeah. Well, it seems to be working.
Yeah,
Now,
it really does. It's the fountain of youth.
were you also doing prolonged fasting? Explain for people what the difference
No,
is and whether you would recommend prolonged fasting for people that are trying to lose weight or trying to
no.
boost their
So
longevity.
let's first define what prolonged fasting is, also known as extended fasting. So I've talked about the daily eating window approach, also known as time restricted eating. That is a very safe protocol, very well researched. One of the biggest experts on that, Dr. Mark Mattson, he worked for Johns Hopkins. He wrote a book about it. He's written journal articles about it. He does it himself. He does time restricted eating. A lot of people out there are doing time restricted eating, especially in the longevity community. Very safe. Alternate daily fasting, like I talked about the example before, where you would fast for like 36 hours and then have an eating period of 12. And you could literally alternate that, 36, 12, 36, 12, as long as you felt like it, because it's not going to slow your metabolic rate, because that 12 hours of eating is balancing. It's well balanced. But when you start getting beyond alternate daily fasting, that's when we move into extended fasting territory. And we just basically don't have research on that. We don't have research as to what happens when you do extended fasting beyond alternate daily fasting. What's your body going to do with that long term? Can you lose weight with it? Yes. But will there be metabolic consequences? Probably. And let me explain why I think that's the case. There's one study that I reference in Fast Feast Repeat, and it was a 72-hour fast. They studied what happened to people during the 72-hour fast, and that would be an extended fast, for example. And I'm a big believer that there are a lot of healing benefits associated with these types of fasts. There are fasting centers all over the world where people with illnesses go and work with doctors who help them through these medically supported extended fasts. I'm not against the longer fasts, but in this one study on 72-hour fast, now to keep in mind, these people were not doing it as a lifestyle. They were not intermittent fasters. They weren't following time restricted eating. They just did one 72-hour fast, and the researchers looked at them. So when they started, let's imagine their metabolic rate was right here. We'll call that their baseline. Everybody had a baseline for their metabolic rate. When they started fasting, their metabolic rate actually increased for the first part of the fast. So that's good. Metabolic rate going up. The body's kind of ramping up. It's getting into the fat stores. It's doing what it needs to do. Eventually, it hit the highest point and started to go back down. So, in the second part of that 72-hour fast, metabolic rate was on a downward trajectory. When they got to 72 hours, the metabolic rate was still slightly higher than it had been at baseline, but like I said, it was on its way down. So, we can predict from that, based on what we know about going up and coming back down, probably if they kept going, their metabolic rate would have kept going down, 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 because what is the body going to do when it perceives that you are starving? It's going to slow your metabolic rate because it wants you to stay alive. It doesn't know your goal is to fit into your bathing suit or to look better. It just knows, might die, slow metabolism, keep this person alive. That's what your body's designed to do. You want it to do that. But if your goal is weight loss, you don't want to slow your metabolism through fasting too much. That's why the balance is so important. And it's also really important to note that was one 72-hour fast in isolation. If somebody is doing repeated long fasts over and over and over again, where's their metabolism go? We just don't know. We don't know. So I am very, very cautious about recommending fasts beyond alternate daily fasting. Like I said, that's well researched. They have followed people for a long period of time doing like a 36-12 approach with intermittent fasting, with alternate daily fasting. And the metabolism doesn't slow more than would be expected. You've got your day that you're eating. That's called the up day, where you have your 12 hours of eating. That keeps your metabolism from crashing because you're having the longer period. What you don't want to do though is like a 36-hour fast and then have like a tiny little eating window and then do it again, because you got to have that balance where you're eating more. And I talk about all of that in my books about the different approaches, because even though fasting is good, like everything, there's a point where you get to the diminishing returns and it actually can become a bad thing where it's too much. Everything
Yeah.
is like that. Exercise, very good for you. Can you over exercise? Yes. Not good for you. Water, drinking water is good for you. But if you drink too much water, you can die. So fasting is a similar thing. You want to have the right amount of fasting for your situation, and extended fasting can get sticky because people just, well, if fasting is good, more must be better. Well, you could end up with a lowered metabolic rate and have lots of issues. When I think back to my early days, I started my first Facebook community, and I don't have Facebook communities anymore. I'm now off of Facebook. But my first Facebook community we started in 2015 and grew to over 500 or about 500,000 combined members by the time I left Facebook. So we had a lot of people in there. But in the early days, nobody knew what they were doing when it came to fasting. And so there were people who would say, you know what? It was after the obesity code came out. People were starting to do more extended fasting. It was popular. Autophagy was in the news, which is um, it's cellular housekeeping that they get dreamt up through fasting. So people are like, I'm just going to fast till I get to my goal weight, and they would just fast for like, I don't know, 20 days or something. They would just keep fasting. And even, the book, The Complete Guide to Fasting, that came out in 2016, one of the authors of that book, he was like, God, was talking about like 21-day fasts in there. And so people were trying that because people were just experimenting. And what we noticed, the people who were doing really long fasts might have lost a lot of weight in a short time, but then they started binging. Their body's fighting back, trying to keep you alive, and it's sending you the signal to eat. It's really hard to not do what your body wants you to do. And if you don't believe that, hold your breath as long as you can. Eventually, your body will make you take a breath. The same thing with eating. Your body's going to command you to start eating, and it's really hard to fight against that command. So the people who would do the longer fasts would end up binging. They would gain the weight back quicker than they had lost it.
I think it also depends on, like, your personality type as well. I agree that
Yeah,
it is really of a kind of this pendular swing, right? If you're gonna go extreme on one end, there's gonna be some force out there that's gonna wanna bring you back to this other end. I have a good friend of mine, and he's got this very extreme personality. I think a lot of people listening probably have that, which is like
right,
they can either go in or all out, right? If they're gonna have one
right,
drink, they're gonna go fully into it. If they're passionate about a hobby, they're gonna go all into it or nothing. And the same thing with
right.
eating. So what he does is he does what's called OMAD, which is one meal a day, and he can eat pretty much like whatever he wants within that period for that one meal. But then he has to go to the extreme, which is not eat anything. And I agree that you kind of need to pair that. If you're gonna be fasting for all that time, there needs to be some limitation that allows you to still stay on guard when you come back to
Yeah.
real life of eating, which is maybe you
Mhm.
do need to pair it with intermittent fasting while you're doing this prolonged fasting if you're gonna go that route to lose weight,
Yeah.
for the process of autophagy and all that stuff.
Mhm.
But my understanding, Jane, was that autophagy works at a different level when you're doing extended fasting. For example, like
Well, yes.
once you're fasting for 24 hours, it triggers certain parts of autophagy that wouldn't if you were only fasting for 16
Well, here's
hours.
the thing to keep in mind about that is, that's still very much being studied, right? And you can look at all these calculators and and all these timelines of when autophagy starts. And autophagy is not like on off. It's more like dimmer switch for your lights. Like think about your lights, a dimmer switch. And other things cause autophagy to be increased. Exercise causes autophagy to go up. Did you know that? And you don't have to be fasting for exercise to cause your body to have increased autophagy. Coffee causes autophagy to increase. So there are things that cause autophagy to increase. Fasting is one of them. If you're a daily intermittent faster and you are fasting daily, like I have about an average of a 5-hour window. So that would be my average fast would be about 19 hours. So you might think, okay, well, Jen never gets into autophagy because she doesn't go 24 hours. But that's not true. I am fasting clean and my body's flipping that metabolic switch every day where it's not relying on me putting in new fuel. It's using the fuel that's already here, the fuel I ate yesterday, right? And so, and then my body can get into ketosis, even though I'm not low carb. And I believe that the processes of ketosis and autophagy happen in the same state in the body. When
Mm,
you're in the low energy state, it does not take 24 hours for you to have increased autophagy. And actually, Dr. Mark Mattson talks about that in his paper, Flipping the Metabolic Switch, which is where I got that wording. You can Google that, Flipping the Metabolic Switch, Dr. Mark Mattson. That paper might have come out in something like 2018. I'm not sure, but that really taught me a lot about ketosis, autophagy, what's happening in our bodies while we're fasting. So if you're doing an extended fast, will you get into deeper levels of autophagy? Sure you will. Do you need to? That's a great question. Remember how I said that if I, had like certain illnesses or needed extended fasting, you would go to a fasting center
mm.
and do those longer fasts under medical supervision, not for weight loss, but for healing purposes that the deeper autophagy might bring. You would do that under medical supervision. But the downside is probably you're going to end up with a slower metabolic rate when you're done. Have you heard of Dr. Joel Furman? Are you familiar with him?
I haven't, no.
He wrote a book. I got to remember the name of it. It's on my
Mhm.
shelf over there. Okay.
Yeah.
Fasting and Eating for Health. He wrote that. I'm not sure when he wrote that. It was a while back, but he has, fasts patients and works with patients. And I remember reading that he does extended fasting for healing purposes with his patients. And I remember when I first read that, it was maybe around 2017. Not sure when he wrote it, but it was when I had my Facebook groups and didn't, we wanted to be providing good information. So I kept learning. He says in that book, when you're done with the fast, your metabolism will be really slow. And so you're going to have to be really careful. And I'm like, wow. It's like, this has been well known. So I don't want people to chase autophagy, I guess is the point that I'm making. I
Sure,
don't want
yeah.
people, and if you've got a fasting app and the app says autophagy doesn't start till 24 hours, that is nonsense. We're not working on a timer. Those fasting apps are giving you an estimate based on, like, if someone started fasting and they've never fasted before, ever. Maybe it would take 24 hours, then your body would start ramping it up. But if you're an intermittent faster, your body is not having to start from zero every day, if that makes sense. Does that help at
Yeah.
all?
It does, it
Okay.
does. Yeah, we also had Dr. Alan Goldhammer on, and I think he runs,
Okay. Big fan of his.
what's the name of his center? But it's the biggest water-only fasting center
Mm.
in the world or something.
I could have told you if you hadn't asked me. I can't think of it. True North? Is he
Yeah.
True North? Yeah.
True North,
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean,
there you go.
if I had something wrong with me, like if I went to the doctor, hopefully I won't, right? Because I'm counting on intermittent fasting to be anti-tumor, right?
Mhm,
I want autophagy to clean up all the junk. It's really interesting to note that Dr. Mark Mattson, who I mentioned before, the one from Johns Hopkins that wrote the book about intermittent fasting and several great journal articles, he doesn't do extended fasting. He just does time restricted eating.
mm.
So, that's good enough for me. He's not like, I must fast for 5 days to get, no, he just does time restricted eating. He believes that gives you the benefits that we're looking for. So we don't need to chase that autophagy. But like I said, if by some, terrible fate, I were diagnosed with some sort of cancer, I'd be calling up Alan Goldhammer and I'd be going to True North. But I
Agreed,
would do it under
agreed.
medical supervision. Never do any longer fasts beyond 72 hours unless you're under medical supervision.
Yeah, I think for the far majority of the people, especially for those that, we talked about systems versus goals. I think
Right.
it's important to emphasize that, like, figure out whatever you can maintain over the long haul. And
Uh-huh.
most people, for the far majority that want are doing this for prevention purposes or losing weight,
Mhm.
or to maintain their weight. I think intermittent fasting is great. Where prolonged fasting um, can work is, I have a friend of mine who, at the age of 30, was diagnosed with breast cancer,
Oh,
and
yeah.
she wanted to do it all naturally. So
Mhm.
no chemotherapy, none of that. And she really relied on, Dr. Jason Fung's work, where she was
Right.
doing a keto diet and fasting particularly,
Mhm.
and actually just went everything went completely well.
Love it.
She's doing great now, and she credits a lot of that to these prolonged fasting, but that's such an
Right.
extreme case
Absolutely.
that
And that
it may not
I
be
am
for everyone.
100% a fan of therapeutic fasting for targeted health reasons, but notice not for weight loss. I don't
Yeah.
think that the long fasts, because there's going to be that trade-off. And again, I've just seen it so many times in the real world. I'm a school teacher. I have my school teacher background. I know how to teach people how to apply things. And I'm also really good at observing what people are doing and is that working? And what we know, the people who have struggled a lot are the ones who have done too much fasting. Over fasting, they might lose the weight. Like I was talking about the people that would fast for, there's like, I'm just going to fast for 21 days. They would lose a lot of weight. They never kept it off. Those
Mm.
people always rebounded and were heavier than they started and now caught in a cycle of binge restrict, binge restrict. If you ever start getting the signal, once your body's fat adapted, so it might take, 28 days for your body. I have 28-day fast start is one of my books, 28 days to get your body fat adapted for your body to flip that metabolic switch. Once you're fat adapted, you should feel great. If you start feeling an increased urge to binge over time, that's a sign that you are doing something that's not working well. You might be over fasting. You're not nourishing your body sufficiently. Our bodies need nutrients. That's super important. My book, Fast, Feast, Repeat, it's not fast, eat a tiny diet meal, repeat. We need to nourish our bodies well. So an increased signal to binge is not a good sign. So always be on the lookout for that.
Yeah, my actual story of first learning how to fast, was when I was living in New York City. I was, like, 20 or 21 at that time. Completely broke, like, had no money to live in New York, right? But, I was actually living on my friend's couch at that time. It's a long story, but I was, dating a girl who was kind of introducing me to intermittent fasting, and she was eating, like, whenever we would go out for dinner, she would eat, like, for 3 people, but she was so skinny, just half Japanese
Yeah.
girl, and, I was like, "Oh my god, like, what's going on here?" So I was researching it, and the key takeaway was not even for weight loss. It was like, "Oh, so I can spend 60% of what I'm spending now for my meals and still maintain my health and everything." So I was like, I'm in,
Yeah.
like, sign me up, right? Especially in New York. So I started doing it. And what happened is after like 3 or 4 months, I was just like burning all this weight, but my testosterone dropped.
Oh, did it? Okay. Were you
And
nourishing yourself well? What
well,
was
I
your
guess
what was your eating window like? What were you
right.
doing?
So this was my secondary question is I think I was undereating a lot while
Mhm.
burning a lot of the cardio and the calories just
Yeah.
from working out.
Yeah.
What are
Oh, over
your
exercising. Yes. See,
yeah,
and that's
talk
the
about that a
trap
little
we
bit.
get into in this modern world. I talked before about calories in, calories out, eat less, move more. We're here in America and you're in Canada now,
Yeah.
right now. Where here
Mhm.
in the Western world, let me just put it that way, or modern world, maybe it's all around the world now. It's not just good to, go for a walk. We have to run a marathon. We don't want to run a marathon. We want to run an ultra marathon, right? More and more and more. And so there's that sweet spot. And activity levels are part of the equation as well. It's not just what you're eating. If you are fasting more than is right for your body and your activity level, if you are exercising more than you can sustain, that's not going to be good for your body. Hormones will go down exactly like that. So it's all about finding that sweet spot for you. If you're really active, you probably need a longer window. So,
Mm,
a lot of times we hear like your experience with testosterone going down, clear sign that you were over fasting, over exercising, not providing your body with the nutrients that it needed. We hear the same thing about women. You're like, oh, fasting is going to be bad for women's hormones. And it's not fasting that's bad for women's hormones or men's hormones. It's over restriction coupled with too much activity. That's two sides of the same coin, right? Over exercising, not eating enough, all of that. And so we want to nourish our body well in a way that is sustainable and not too much for our individual body. So, someone like my husband, 8-hour eating window, that works really well for him. Someone who runs marathons, maybe they need an 8-hour eating window. I do a little working out, but a little bit here and there. So I don't need an 8-hour window.
Mm. So
And
for
it's just
people
about finding
that
that balance for you. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. For someone that is listening that does high intensity workouts, they're in great shape, but
Hmm.
they want to do intermittent fasting for whatever reason,
Yeah,
longevity, weight loss, a little bit. Is the idea then is to do probably like something like an 8-hour window, but they still eat
maybe.
the same amount in the same meals, just within a smaller window, so they're not under eating.
This is where you learn how to listen to your body.
Hmm.
Have you heard the protein leverage hypothesis?
No.
It's one that's out there in the world, and it's based on some research I think they initially did with like fruit flies or something, but you can apply it to obviously to living creatures that we will eat until we've met our protein needs for the day. Like that's part of
Mm.
satiety is making sure you've had enough protein. I genuinely believe that we are meant to know when we need to eat more and know when we haven't had enough. And so the beauty of intermittent fasting is you really do learn to listen to your body. On a day when I go to Pilates, I do reformer Pilates once a week. When I go to reformer Pilates and I'm doing an hour on those machines, working my muscles, I might get home and be like, why am I a little hungrier today? And I open a little early and maybe my body's like, ooh, I want some meat. I don't eat meat every day, but maybe that day I'm craving like some red meat or something. My body is asking for a little bit more. And so I eat a little bit more that day. You really can reconnect with your hunger and satiety signals and know how much you need to eat and if you need to add more. Your body will let you know because you'll be hungry. You should not have to white knuckle it and like make yourself, like if it's miserable, something's not working. In our community, we have a saying, tweak it till it's easy. And that is really how intermittent fasting should feel. It
Yeah.
should feel easy, the fasting part and the eating part. When you're in balance and you have figured out the right amount of fasting that feels good, the right amount of eating window, the foods that you eat within your window that satisfy your body nutritionally, physically, and emotionally. I think all three of those are important. You just really live your life like the people in the blue zones who are not thinking about how much they've eaten. They just do what they do. In a lot of those blue zones, fasting is a regular part of their lives through their religion. I don't know if you knew that.
Right, right.
Yeah,
Ikaria, in the Greek
right.
island, right? Like a lot of the
Hmm.
Orthodox
Yeah,
folks.
lot of religious fasting days, and
Yeah.
so
Yeah, there's a lot of
they're not
commonality
counting a
there.
macro over there. They're just living.
Yeah, yeah. Even the Okinawans, they have the term called hara hichibu, which is
Yeah.
I think once you're 80%, you're full. So there's a
Hmm.
lot of commonalities there that we can learn from for sure.
Right.
So for people like myself or particularly women that may be worried about their hormones, are there certain biomarkers they should be measuring, let's say before and after they start their
Well,
intermittent
here's
fasting
a great,
journey?
I did a podcast episode with a good friend of mine, Dr. Tabitha Barber. She's an OBGYN, she's a functional medicine doctor. And she came on our Fast Feast Repeat podcast to talk about this with women and hormones and is fasting bad for hormones. And again, like I said, it's over restriction is bad for women. Like she talked about like Olympic gymnasts, for example. The women who are Olympic gymnasts that are strong and training so hard, they often lose their periods.
Wow.
That is what I think she called it the fifth vital sign. Your fifth vital sign is if you're a woman, it's your period. And so we know that if you're overdoing the exercise, over restricting with your diet, like for example, anorexic women will lose their periods. So that's how you know. If you lose your period, then you're hormonally, something's not going well. But actually, what we find in our community is the opposite. We don't have women who are coming in and suddenly losing their periods. What we have is the people who like might have had PCOS, if you're familiar with that. It is a problem that is really epidemic in the modern world with women, and it's a sign of insulin resistance. High levels of insulin can
Mm.
cause the polycystic ovaries, and so getting the insulin down, we find women who have PCOS who have had very irregular periods because their body's all out of whack hormonally. When they do intermittent fasting, suddenly their periods become regular for the first time And it's just remarkable. I talked to an OBGYN for Intermittent Fasting Stories, Dr. Cecily Ganhart, back in maybe 2019. It was a while back, but she was an OBGYN, and she was actually using fasting with her PCOS patients to improve fertility.
Mm.
So again, there's that sweet spot. If you overfast and overtrain or over diet or over take Ozempic, I mean, anything that is too restrictive for your body, whether it's diet pills, Ozempic, fasting, dieting, anything, exercising, if you do too much for your body, it is hormonally bad. Fasting is not specially bad. All those other things are also not good for our bodies. To have good working hormones, we need to nourish our bodies well and take care of ourselves. And we can absolutely do that within the paradigm of intermittent fasting.
Yeah, it's a balance, kind of
Yeah,
basically what
it's
my mother has
balance.
taught me this whole time. Comes full circle, maybe.
Mom
Just
was
comes to
right.
balance. That's it. Mama's always right. Speaking of my mom, actually, one thing I've been trying to get her to do intermittent fasting. One of the things that has prevented her is that she gets these stomach pains. I'm sure you've heard of a lot of people that first start when they don't eat. So particularly in the morning, if she doesn't eat for a while, and she's never done intermittent fasting before, right? So she doesn't eat because she's just so used to eating breakfast at a certain time. Her stomach would start hurting, or
Yeah, that's
they
actually
would get hunger
not
pains.
typical. You shouldn't have pain in your stomach. And if someone has pain in their actual stomach, I'm not talking about like stomach growling or hunger pangs of like, I'm hungry, my stomach's rumbling. If she's having actual pain in her stomach, I would have her get that checked out by a doctor because that might be a sign of like an ulcer or something like H.
I think it's a
pylori.
hunger pain, though. I think it's probably
Okay,
hunger
well, she's
pain.
just having hunger. Okay,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I wonder if
She's
she is
describing it like
fasting.
it's like stomach pain, but it's probably just a little
Well,
growling.
if she's just hungry, I wonder if she's fasting clean because skipping breakfast is not the same thing as fasting clean. So I know I told you I would talk about fasting clean, and I haven't really
Yeah.
said much about it. We have three goals for fasting clean. One of them is keeping insulin low, and I already talked about that. And so we keep insulin low by not causing our body to have a cephalic phase insulin response. So if she's having any kind of diet soda, if she's putting any sweetener in her tea or coffee, she's having lemon in her water, all of those things could cause her to have a cephalic phase insulin response. Um, the second goal of fasting clean is that we want to tap into our stored fat for fuel. And so our body has to have a reason to go there. So we don't want to put anything into our body that's going to be a source of fuel. So we don't want to put milk in our coffee or our tea, or butter, or MCT oil, or any of the crazy things, coconut oil that people might be putting in their coffee, no kind of creamers, because we want to use our stored fat for fuel. That's where the mental clarity is going to come in, and that's we want to burn that stored fuel. And also we want to have that increased autophagy. That's fasting goal number 3. And we do that by avoiding anything with protein. So we don't want to have any bone broth or anything like that. So if she's really feeling bad, or anybody who's fasting and they're feeling really, really hungry, you need to check and see if you're fasting clean, and you probably are not. Plain water, plain sparkling water, no flavors at all, black coffee. Yes, that little splash of something you're putting in there is messing you up. Yes, I promise. And plain tea, real tea, not all those things that are on the tea aisle that are not actually made of tea, but are made of other things. No, don't have those. So if you can fast clean, then you're going to find you might have a rumble of hunger, but then your body flips that switch and you feel better. That's what my book, 28-Day Fast Start Day by Day, does. I haven't held that one up, so I'll hold this one up. This walks you through every day of your first 28 days. You got the little numbers down on the side. And you pick a plan. Like your mom would probably want to start with the easy does it. You're easing yourself in the easiest way possible. You ease yourself in and you build up that fasting muscle so that you're
Mm.
able to do it. Because you don't
What
just
does
start
that
on
look
day one
like?
and hmm,
What does that look like? That
the
easing
easy does it. Well,
plan that you're
actually,
talking about?
in the easy does it plan, this would be for somebody who is maybe older, or maybe struggled with their weight for a long time, or just not really ready to rip that Band-Aid off and go straight to fasting much. But you actually start off, you're trying to become fat adapted, right? You want your body to be less reliant on having to have meals with you're probably a sugar burner, right? Because you've been eating those frequent meals, you're on the blood sugar roller coaster. So you actually start by having a low carb breakfast on day one and a low carb lunch. And then for dinner, you have like what you would regularly have, just whatever you normally have. Now, this is not the point where I tell you that you have to be low carb to do intermittent fasting. You don't. I'm not low carb. I eat lots and lots of carbs, high quality carbs, potatoes, rice, vegetables, beans. Those are my favorite. But while you're becoming fat adapted, if you're really easing in the easiest way possible, low carb breakfast, low carb lunch, now your body's starting to shift those fuel sources. Then eventually, you delay that low carb breakfast and now you're just having your low carb lunch. You're building it up. And then eventually you're not doing that anymore. It's kind of like those are like the little training wheels of the low carb meals
Mm.
that teach your body to be fat adapted while you're gradually shrinking your eating window to what you want it to be.
Yeah, that's very helpful. I think a lot of people
Yeah,
just don't know where to start, and I think that's
right.
why books
Well,
like
that's this
yours
right
and
here. No, not this. This one right here.
you have so many books,
28
Jen,
day
it's hard to
fast
keep
start
up.
day by day literally walks you through day by day exactly. And there's like a little quiz you take to decide. There are 3 different plans you can start with, and you decide. Someone might be rip off the band-aid and they're just skipping breakfast the first day and that's it. And only the very easiest ease-in plan makes you eat anything low carb. It's like I said, I'm not low carb. I'm not telling you you need to be low carb, but it can help with you becoming fat adapted.
For
And so
sure.
it's
Well, I think it's very
part of like a little,
relatable when
yeah,
you're
part of the
also
process.
able to eat what you want.
Well, yeah,
Well, Jen,
I'm not giving up anything.
that's it. Balance, balance.
Right.
Well, Jen, first of all, I want to acknowledge kind of the work that you've done to spread this message, but also the story that you have of being through this yourself, losing 80 pounds in 10 months. A lot of people put this information out, but they actually haven't gone through the journey. So it's kind of
Right.
like someone putting out information, but they've never actually had results. They've never
Yeah.
actually gone through the struggles of losing weight in this particular case. So I think you're a great example of someone that's done that and shared with people. So I
Well,
want to
there
make
I
sure
am.
people,
I don't know if you can see it. Can you see that?
yeah, show people the
That's me.
put it closer.
That's
Oh my
me.
goodness, that
Yeah.
is such a transformation.
Yeah, that's the 80 pounds. And my whole entire diet story, I have it in Delay Don't Tonight at the very end. So this is
Yeah.
where my whole diet story is. You can see everything that I did along the way. And you have to keep in mind that when I was doing it, there was no good information out there, which is one reason why I wrote this book in 2016, because there wasn't anything. I'm a teacher. I want to teach people how to do things the right way.
Mm,
And so I was like, well, there's really no book out there that really tells you exactly what to do the right way. And so I wrote it myself.
that's amazing. Well, before we go, I want to ask you a question. We talked a
Okay.
lot about intermittent fasting and obviously that how that relates to longevity, health, energy. Um, Talk to me about some of the other principles that you've learned, lessons that you've learned, whether it's foods that you've taken or just principles that you've learned, just around how someone listening can boost their longevity, energy, anything that you've just
Oh,
learned
yeah.
around health and wellness throughout all of these decades of your journey.
I think the biggest thing is that real food for the win. Remember I said before that the only animals on planet Earth struggling with weight are humans and the animals we feed? That's because think of it, look at the grocery store. Look at the dog food, the cat food, the treats, the snacks we're eating as humans. All that, we now call that ultra processed food. Ultra processed food does not give us the satiety signals. Like you could eat an entire bag of Doritos and that's a ton of calories, but you've given your body 0 nutrients. So you're still hungry. Of course you are. Your body doesn't count calories, it counts nutrients. So if you could just tune out all the diet noise, about like, oh, this food is, this real food from nature is bad for you, or that real food from nature is bad for you, depending on whether you're listening to the low carb people or the carnivore people or the vegans or whatever it is. They all have foods that they demonize as bad foods. Don't eat those. Instead, get rid of all that noise and just think, is it real food or is it not? If it's real food and it's the food that your ancestors could have eaten, If you recognize the ingredients that are in it, you could recreate it in your kitchen. Eat that food, real food. And like somebody in my community today, she's like, I've been scared to eat fruit because I always heard fruit was so bad. And I'm like, bless your heart, fruit is not bad. It's real food. Eat the fruit. Applesauce, maybe not, but eat an apple. Eat food as nature intended it. And you will feel so much better the more real foods you eat. And remember, I was eating the standard American diet. I was going through the drive-through, I was doing convenience foods, and now I cook dinner at home 6 nights of the week. And I love to cook food, real food, and eat high quality food. It has to be window worthy. But the number one thing I would tell people, whether you're going to do intermittent fasting or not, is eat the real food and stop listening to the people that tell you that, tomatoes are bad or, a carrot is going to kill you or don't eat a steak, whatever it is. If it's real food, eat the real food. And if you feel like crap after you eat it, maybe that's a real food that doesn't work for you. Like every time you eat dairy, your nose starts to run. Maybe your body doesn't tolerate dairy. But I didn't tell you that. Your body told you that. So you
Yeah.
learn to listen to yourself. There are people who can't eat dairy. I am not one of them. But you learn from your body what doesn't work for you and what
Yeah.
foods your body might be, maybe intolerant to in general.
Yeah. Listen to yourself. Yeah. Beautifully
Listen to
said,
your
Jenny.
body. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being on the show. Really appreciate you.
Thank you for having me.